The HMS Nelson served extensively in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic and the Indian during the Second World War. She was commissioned in 1927, decommissioned in 1948 and scrapped in 1949. The illustration shows the HMS Nelson as she was in 1945, with increased anti-aircraft armament. With a standard displacement of 36,000 tons, the HMS Nelson had a length of 216.4 meters, a beam of 32.3 meters and a draft of 10.6 meters. With an engine power of 46,000 horsepower, the HMS Nelson could achieve a maximum speed of 23 knots, and with her load of 3,815 tons of petrol she could travel 13,870 nautical miles at a speed of 12 knots. The armament of the HMS Nelson comprised 9 406mm cannons installed in 3 triple turrets, 12 152mm cannons installed in 6 twin turrets, 6 120mm cannons installed in 6 single mountings, 64 40mm cannons installed in 6 octuple mountings, and 4 quadruple mountings, 55 20mm cannons installed in single mountings, and 2 622mm torpedo tubes installed underwater in the bow. The armor layers of the HMS Nelson had a thickness of 356mm in the belt, 76 to 159mm in the middle deck, 159mm in the lower deck, 356 to 381mm in the barbettes, 178 to 406mm in the main cannon turrets, 25 to 38mm in the secondary cannon turrets and 340mm in the conning tower. The armament on the HMS Nelson was distributed like this: 3 406mm triple mountings, all afore, 6 152mm twin mountings, all abaft, 6 120mm twin mountings, 4 in the fore section of the superstructure and 2 abaft, 6 40mm octuple mountings, 1 atop the middle 406mm mounting, 2 next to the funnel and 3 abaft, for 40mm quadruple mountings, 2 in front of the Admiral's bridge and 2 just behind the funnel, and 55 20mm single mountings, scattered throughout the whole ship. The machinery of the battleships of the Nelson class was necessarily limited in size, so there were only 2 shafts fitted with quite large 3-bladed propellers. All of the previous British battleships launched after the HMS Dreadnought from 1906, as well as all of the British battleships launched after the Nelson class, had 4 propellers. The two battleships of the Nelson class had a single rudder and a steering gear of unusual design, which allowed the rudder to be swung over in 30 seconds. The HMS Nelson was built with two fire control modules fitted with optical coincidence rangefinders of 4.6 meters in span to direct the aim of the 406mm cannons. One of them was installed on the after end of the superstructure and could see the horizon about 12.9 kilometers afar. For small fire control modules fitted with optical coincidence rangefinders and Type 282, 283 or 285 aerial fire control radars, which had a 2 to 6 element Yagi antenna and operated with a frequency of 600 MHz, 50 cm wavelength, directed the aim of the QF Mark 8 40mm anti-aircraft mountings. On September 1941, the HMS Nelson was fitted with Type 283 radars to direct the aim of the 406mm cannons when firing anti-aircraft barrages. Located at roughly 25 meters above the main weather deck, the spotting top was the highest observation point on the HMS Nelson and the modern equivalent of the crow's nest found on age-of-sail ships. From there an observer could see the horizon about 20 kilometers afar. The armor in the secondary cannon turrets was made of Ducal non-cemented steel plates of 25 mm in thickness installed on top of structural steel plates of 12.7 mm in thickness. With a maximum thickness of only 38 mm in the frontal face, this armor was greatly inferior to the counterparts adopted in other contemporary battleships, up to 100 mm in the Bismarck class and up to 150 mm in the Littorio class. The main crane had a 18-meter-long steel boom which was attached to the main tripod mast and operated by winches through steel pulleys and cables. Its most obvious purpose was to move small boats from the boat deck to the sea and vice versa, but it was useful for hoisting ammunition and other heavy elements as well. In contrast with other contemporary battleships, the HMS Nelson had only two searchlights, which were placed in platforms attached to each side on the rear part of the funnel. Another two smaller searchlights intended for signals were placed in the Admiral's Bridge. The armor in the main belt was made of Krupp cemented steel plates, with a thickness of 356 mm spanning the barbettes of the main artillery pieces, and a thickness of 330 mm spanning the engine and boiler rooms as well as the ammunition magazines of the 152 mm cannons. The main belt did not protect either the bow or the stern. The weight of the armor was reduced by using an internal belt which had an outward inclination of 18 degrees from the vertical plane. This inclination increased the thickness of the belt relative to a plunging projectile. On April 1925, the German magazine Marine Rundschau reported that the British battleships HMS Rodney and HMS Nelson would not be fitted with torpedo bulges for torpedo protection, due to the many disadvantages, and that it was chosen instead to increase the partitioning below the waterline. However, these ships were provided with underwater protection which consisted of a double bottom of 1.5 meters in depth and a layered defense comprising an outer empty watertight compartment and an inner water-filled compartment. The unarmored external hull of the ship was meant to detonate the warheads outside the armor. The torpedo defense system had a total depth of 3.7 meters and was backed by a torpedo bulkhead of 38 millimeters in thickness. This innovation dispensed with external torpedo bulges, which would have reduced the speed of the ships due to drag. The system was similar in design and effectiveness to that used in the HMS Hood and was rated to withstand an explosion of 340 kilograms of TNT. The armor in the main cannon turrets was made of Krupp cemented steel plates with a thickness of 305 to 381 millimeters in the barbettes, 406 mm in the front, 229 to 279 mm in the sides, 229 mm in the rear and 184 mm in the roof. The armor in the small and rather low conning tower was made of Krupp cemented steel plates with a thickness of 305 mm in the front, 356 mm in the sides, 254 mm in the rear and 165 mm in the roof. Located at roughly 15 meters above the main weather deck, the unarmored Admiral's Bridge was the preferred place for controlling the navigation, whereas the uncomfortable conning tower was used only during combat actions. The HMS Nelson was built with two fire control modules fitted with optical coincidence rangefinders of 4.6 meters in span to direct the aim of the 406 mm cannons. One of them was installed on top of the Admiral's Bridge and could see the horizon about 18.6 kilometers afar. On September 1941, this fire control module was fitted with a Type 284 surface fire control radar, which had two wide and low array antennas and operated with a frequency of 600 MHz, 50 cm wavelength. The aim of the secondary armament was directed by two fire control modules fitted with optical coincidence rangefinders of 3.7 meters in span, installed at each side of the main fire control module on top of the Admiral's Bridge. The aim of the anti-aircraft armament was directed by two fire control modules fitted with optical coincidence rangefinders of 3.7 meters in span, installed on the top of an 8-meter tall tower rising on top and right behind the Admiral's Bridge. These directors used a complex computerized system called HACS, High Angle Control System, to track the rapidly changing position of a flying target. In 1940, radar rangefinders were added to the HACS. On September 1941, these fire control modules were fitted with respective Type 285 aerial fire control radars, which had a 5-element Yagi antenna and operated with a frequency of 600 MHz, 50 cm wavelength. There were hose reels distributed throughout the ship, which were useful for washing the decks or for fighting fires. The HMS Nelson had three bower anchors, two anchors located on port and starboard side respectively, and a sheet anchor located right after the starboard anchor. Underwater torpedo tubes were included in capital ships already in the era of the ironclad, and after the First World War they were still included in some battleship designs. The Mark I 622mm torpedo was a British model, carried only on the battleships of the Nelson class. The underwater launchers were angled 10 degrees off the centerline. Despite the former popularity of underwater torpedo tubes in capital ships, the only known occasion that a battleship fired torpedoes at an enemy battleship was when the HMS Rodney launched two torpedoes against the German battleship Bismarck. With the addition of 10 20mm anti-aircraft cannons on the boat deck, the HMS Nelson was left with a relatively small space behind the funnel, chiefly occupied by a couple of gig motorboats. The provision of lifeboats could be expanded thanks to the installation of a lattice boom crane amidships. In this illustration, they are depicted 3 motorboats, 2 rowing boats, and a good number of pneumatic rafts. The BL Mark XXII 152mm naval cannon, BL meaning breech loading, weighed 9 tons and had a barrel length of 7.62 meters, 50 calibers. It had a muzzle velocity of 898 meters/second and an effective firing range of up to 23 kilometers, being able to fire 5 45 kilogram or 51 kilogram shells per minute. Albeit the twin mountings on which the BL Mark XXII was installed were capable of a high elevation angle, and thus classified as dual-purpose mountings, their rotation and elevation speeds were actually too slow for the anti-aircraft role. The QF Mark VIII 120mm naval cannon, QF meaning quick firing, had a barrel length of 4.8 meters, 40 calibers, a muzzle velocity of 749 meters/second and an effective firing range of up to 14.8 kilometers with a 22.7 kilogram shell. These pieces, which could fire up to 12 rounds per minute, were an important part of the anti-aircraft artillery on board the HMS Nelson before the subsequent upgrades, which added a large number of quick-firing cannons. They were installed in powered HA-12 single mountings, HA meaning high angle, which protected the cannon gear but did not shelter the artillerymen. The QF Mark 8 40mm anti-aircraft cannon had a barrel length of 1.575 meters, 39 calibers, a muzzle velocity of 732 meters/second, an effective firing range of up to 4,000 meters in anti-aircraft ceiling and a rate of fire of 115 rounds per minute. The Mark V octuple mounting, nicknamed Pom-Pom, which was suitable for ships of cruiser size upward, allowed for a devastating firepower with a combined rate of fire of around 900 rounds per minute. The mounting had two horizontal rows of 4 cannons each in the middle and a block of 4 140-round magazines protruding on each side. This unusual and complex arrangement required that the cannons had different feeding and ejection mechanisms depending on where they were located, either the right or left quartet and the inner or outer side of each quartet. This means that the 4 cannons on each horizontal row were different from each other. The Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft cannon had a barrel length of 2.25 meters, 56 calibers, a muzzle velocity of 865 meters/second, an effective firing range of up to 3,800 meters in anti-aircraft ceiling and an average rate of fire of 130 rounds per minute. The powered quadruple mounting of American design comprised 2 twin mountings placed side by side, with a combined rate of fire of around 520 rounds per minute. The Oerlikon Mark II 20mm anti-aircraft cannon had a barrel length of 1.4 meters, 70 calibers, a muzzle velocity of 820 meters/second, an effective firing range of 914 meters and a cyclic rate of fire of 450 rounds per minute. The ammunition was supplied by a 60-round cylindrical magazine. Circa 1935, the HMS Nelson was fitted with a powered lattice boom crane to handle a Supermarine Seagull biplane amphibian aircraft, which was carried for test purposes. This crane was retained after the end of the trials, because it was really handy for lifting small boats and other loads. The BL Mark I 406mm naval cannon weighed almost 110 tons and had a barrel length of 18.85 meters, 45 calibers. It had a muzzle velocity of 788 meters/second and an effective firing range of up to 32 kilometers, being able to fire 2 929 kilogram shells per minute. Regardless of how impressive this cannon was, it was deemed unsatisfactory as it suffered a considerable barrel wear and a fairly large dispersion pattern, due mainly to the different riflings that each barrel had as they were refurbished over their lifespan. There was also an obvious limitation imposed by the unusual arrangement of the main armament. The rearmost main cannon turret could not fire either fully forward or fully rearward, and this latter was particularly inadequate for a battleship which was slower than other contemporary or more modern counterparts. Optical coincidence rangefinder, which had 12.5 meters in span and could see the horizon about 10.7 kilometers afar. Optical coincidence rangefinder, which had 12.5 meters in span and could see the horizon about 12.4 kilometers afar. The armor in the largest part of the main deck was made of Krupp non-cemented steel plates, with a thickness of 159 mm in the area surrounding the main cannon turrets and a thickness of 95 mm in the area between the conning tower and the main tripod mast. This armor was laid on top of Ducal non-cemented structural steel plates of 12.7 mm in thickness. The main deck ran just above the armored belts and transverse bulkheads, which formed the armored citadel. The main weather deck, which was located 2 decks above the main deck, was lined with teak planks to ease walking in wet conditions and was devoid of lighting openings to not compromise protection. Cylindrical structures of about 80 centimeters in height, scattered on the main weather deck, served as the ventilation system of the rooms located beneath them. Other ventilation structures were placed adjacent to the barbette of the middle main cannon turret. Several steam-powered winches were located in the nearabouts of the main cannon turrets. Deck winches serve a variety of functions such as anchoring, mooring, towing, and cargo handling. Paravanes were stored in two small structures attached to the forward breakwater. These torpedo-shaped water kites were towed from lines on the bow to cut the wires of submarine mines to put them afloat before they could damage the ship. These capstans could also serve as chain holders when their whelps were removed. The three anchor chains ran around their respective chain holders and then through naval pipes into the chain lockers, where they were secured. This capstan, with the aid of up to 4 support rollers placed around it, could be used to move the chains of any of the 3 anchors if necessary. Blake screw stoppers were used for securing the anchors during navigation by turning a large bottle screw to apply tension. This way the anchor chains did not carry the weight of their respective anchors after these had been brought into their respective hawse pipes.